All right, okay. Assalamualaikum and good day to my student. Alhamdulillah. So for today, all right. So we're gonna touch on the conceptions and definition, assessment and evaluation, testing and measurement to ensure that you understand the context of assessment and evaluation. So as far as you're concerned, all right, as we already talk about the student-centered learning and how does the student-centered learning has been impacted to our education system, and on this perspective, we try to reaffirm back the concept, the definitions of assessment and evaluation, testing and measurements, on how we as educators to understand this at different when we're going to use this at different locations, different purpose in the context of education. So on the perspective of assessment and evaluation dimensions, I guess that we know that how to use this because of what? Because of we are talking about we are already done with our delivery, we're already done with our curriculum. So how can we assess our students? So at this paradigm, there are two definitions of assessment and evaluations. So what mean by assessment? So assessment is supposed to be ongoing, all right? It must be positive, and the assessment will allow you to assess individual potentials. So meaning that yes, I do agree that we have a group assessment, but at the end of the day, how can we differentiate the individual performance through assessment, and how does the assessment allow us to give feedbacks and also feed forward to improve our student over the time. And if we look on the perspective of evaluations, of course, yes, when we talk about evaluating, the verb is evaluate, we are talking about making judgment. So how we make a judgment. The judgment only can be made by having a predetermined standard, and this predetermined standard would allow us to discriminate whether this one is a success students or the failure students, and we try to close up uh, some context of teaching and learning. So when we talk about assessment, evaluations, every each of these complementing each other, what we need to do here is to ensure that we need to plan our assessment, we need to do our assessment, we need to check our assessment, and we need to take an action based on the assessment data. So this is very simple when we talk about assessment and evaluations. If you look on the perspective of assessment as making decision, all right, so I think that yes, we do agree that if we can relate this one with our real lifetime, all right, so we always making judgment, so we need to make a judgment and we need to make a decision making. So we can see that there are a few perspectives when we look assessment as decision making. Number one, we are looking at evaluations. Is only looking at how can we. It's not involve either test or measure, but is more towards on we provide them with a qualitative descriptions, or the students' performance will be diagnosed for learnings on their problems. But if we look on the condition number two, the evaluation is can be happen by using, for example, do a teacher ranking, use of assigning grading and whatnot. So this will allow us to get the data earlier on how we can see the real performance of the students, but we are not trying to grade them. We just to get some kind of information, and we want to have this to allow us to be ready when we want to conduct our class. And the situation number three, there are intersection between evaluations, testing, and measurement, in which you are using testing for the purpose of evaluations, and you will use that to see the achievement and to determine the student progress. And number four, is a non-evaluative, is more like on the testing. Normally we use for the research purposes. All right. So, and when we talk about the context of assessment and evaluations and how we are measuring on our students' performance, there are three types of assessment: assessment as learning, assessment for learning, assessment of learning. So, what are the difference between these three? So when we talk about the assessment for learning, we are talking about how can we diagnose the students and how we can provide the descriptive feedback. Not the descriptive feedback, but the descriptive data towards the students' quality. All right. So meaning that every time we conduct this assessment for learning, we try to provide the feedback, we try to provide the improvement and interventions, and we hope that the students can improve, and also we also have our part to improve our course also. And assessment as learning, I think that the biggest impact, give us the biggest impact because of what? Because of is involved informal feedback towards our students. And assessment learning, I think that will motivate our students and will help our students to improve their performance. And same with assessment for learning, assessment as learning also provide descriptive feedback to improve, to do the interventions. And then the assessment of learning is towards on how can we sum up our teaching and learning and to see whether the students is really progress or not based on the assessment for learning and assessment as learning has been conducted before. So what I'm trying to say here is assessment for learning, assessment as learning, assessment of learning is actually complementing each other, and it will give a greatest impact to our teaching and learning. And yes, we have to admit that there are some portion maybe fall under assessment for learning, there may be some portion go to assessment of learning, but I do believe that there are lots of effort also can be put through assessment as learning. So if we can translate assessment for learning, normally we said and normally we mention as a continuous assessment or formative assessment, and assessment of learning we normally say call as a summative assessment. All right. So on that particular of notes also, we should look at how adaptive our learning and how adaptive our assessment. So when we talk about the adaptivity of the learning and assessment, how does our assessment become the data driven, and the data driven has been used and remain us to the learning outcome. And then that's the reason why we need to understand the importance of diagnostic informative assessment come with the use of ICT and communications. So because of what, the ICT and communication will help and assist us to provide us with the data, and it will give us some kind of speed to share the data with the students or the clients. And content decision, yes, I guess that content decision um, is uh, is something that we use the technology in the classrooms, and we are talking about the knowledge constructions, we are talking about the problem solvings and innovations, and the content decision normally based on the data driven, and the data driven will give us some indications on how can we design our student at scales. And we should also look on in the era of digitalizations. All right, providing just in time support is something that we should look at, and how does we can collaborate with the students, and how does the content decision making, and how does the content that we design for them can let them to regulate their learning. So that's the reason why when we talk in the perspective of teaching, learning, and assessment, these three elements, data driven, content decision making, and providing just in time support, is very important. Is very important. So we need to understand this. And the reason why we highlighted the shifting and adjusting, we want to ensure that with the new modern of teaching and learning to support 21st century learning design, we cannot only focus on teaching. We should emphasize on shifting teaching to learning. Because of what? Because of we need to avoid the confusions. The role as a teachers, the role as a facilitators, the role as a students. So meaning that this confusion need to be revised, need to be looked at because of what? There are always also confusion between evaluation and assessment. Somehow we as educators cannot distinguish, cannot differentiate what are the difference between evaluation and assessment. And if we refer back the culture of assessment, yes, we have formative and summative assessment, and both of it is very interconnected and seldom stand alone. And we should believe that in the nowadays era, when we're talking about the pandemic COVID, we are talking about the challenges in teaching and learning, even though the assessment, we should look on the potential of formative assessment. How does the formative assessment can give us interactive feedback and allow the student to perform and get better for their chances in doing their tests, and also in many kind of what we call assessment tasks. All right, and that's the reason why we should look on the value of the assessment. The value of assessment meaning that we should believe on the student competency. The student will be able to excel, will be able to success. And as a if we relate back with the national education philosophy, we do believe that everyone can be excel. Then individual potential is not only looking on the intellectual, we are looking on the spiritual, emotional, and physical balance. That's the reason why at the beginning of the class, we start to look at the importance of national education philosophy, the Malaysian education blueprint, to understand that how can we believe on the student potential in the positive way. And number two, we should sharing the learning goals. So what are the learning goals that we need to be shared? We need to make sure that the teachers, the students come together and let them to finish their job, let them to finish the study, let them to finish the course, and let them to succeed. And that's the reason why when we have this and let the student to self-evaluate themselves and know their conditions and give them the feedback and let them to progress. So that's the reason why belief in student sharing learning goals, self-assessment, feedback and progress is very important, and it's valuable to the students, and value this is the values of the assessment. All right. So that's the reason why when we talk about the values, of course, yes, there is some nature on the assessment. So the nature of the assessment is something that we can distinguish whether our assessment is passive or our assessment is active. So normally when we talk about the passive assessment, normally we are looking at examination, short, medium, long essay, fill in the blank, matches, and MCQ. But in comparatively, we can look on the perspective of active assessment. We have a portfolio, presentation, direct observation, project-based, problem-based, case study, and many more. So I think that if we can see, I think that I will share with you the document that we have about 99 assessment tasks that we can do with our students, and most of the assessment task is the active assessment. All right, so that's the reason why if we want to look the potential of passive and also active assessment, we need to understand this first. What means by declarative and non-declarative? To understand declarative and non-declarative, we need to ensure that we really know what are the functions of learning taxonomy. What means by cognitive learning domain, what means by by affective domain, and what means by psychomotor learning domain. Because of what? Because of by understanding the learning taxonomy, then we can know how to use the action verbs, how can we design our delivery, and how can we design our assessment. Okay, so and when we talk about the declarative versus non-declarative knowledge, we are talking about how does the students and how we can use the approach of inquiry-based learning to allow the student to engage with us by having a very authentic assessment, by having the evidence-based assessment. Because of what? Because of if we want to avoid the declarative knowledge and focus on the non-declarative knowledge, meaning that we should allow our student to think and design our assessment towards on that. All right, so this is very important, and this is something that we need to understand, and we need to able to distinguish what means by declarative and non-declarative. All right, so when we talk about declarative and non-declarative, meaning that how we as a teachers focus on the non-declarative and shifting our content into context. Because of what? If we look on the content, we are focused on the margin, we are focused on the coverage, we are focused on the memorization and replication, also the sequence and mastery of learning. So I think that if we want to make sure that we want to use the assessment in the context of learning and create a meaningful learning, meaning that we should align and we should shifting our thinking towards content into context by designing our assessment that relate with personal context, relate with the social cultural context, and relate with the physical context. And due to that, we will get the prior, and we need to ensure that we try our best to engage with the prior knowledge, experience, and interest, this choice and control related to the personal context to create our questions, to create our situations. Same goes with the social culture and how we use the environmental condition, the structure, the support, the system, the culture. Try to explore this. Try to see this as one of the potential to create your content. All right, so content is not limited by having topic in the syllabus. Content can be created by contextualize the learning and look that potential as a huge potential and allow the student to understand better. And how about the physical context? We can use space, we can use time, we can use many more. So just a matter of to explore all of this potential and allow you to understand not only one way on designing our content based on the syllabus, we can design our content more contextual, more engaging, I think that more significant to the students. All right, so that's the reason why when we touch about declarative versus non-declarative, we are talking about how we can provide the experience, how can we focus on from no to does. No meaning that you know something like very factual, very common, low level learning domain activities, and if you want to good, and it was very passive. It was very passive because of what? It was very factual based. But if you start looking on the second level know-how, it focuses on the context-based assessment, meaning that you are focused on the high-level learning activity, and from here, students start to progress, start to develop, and show how you will let students to demonstrate and simulate the environments. And the most important part is how can you bring the experiential action based assessment observation in the real meaning, and student will ask how does can I do this, and it will develop the student progress and also developments from passive into active, and students start to from breadth to the depth, because of when you start to experiential learning, the depth is very important. The student will dive deeper and start to understand and start to appreciate the knowledge. So that's the reason why when we talk about the context of assessment and evaluation, it's not limited into delivery context only. You can use assessment to lead on how to execute your activity and how does the assessment really give impact to the student situation. So um, I think that it's quite interesting is actually when we talk about the declarative and non-declarative, because of what we need to understand what's the meanings of declarative and non-declarative. So for this week assignment, I think that I will put some kind of activity for you to understand better what means by declarative and non-declarative in your perspective, and how can you relate this with the situation of education. So I think that maybe this is going to be your task to understand better, and how does the declarative and non-declarative can be related with your assessment, and how does it impact to the students, especially. All right, so I think that that's all for me. Thank you so much. I think that I hope that I can continue to give you more input about this, inshallah. So see you next in the next video. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum.